The clock read 2:13 a.m. when my phone buzzed, shattering the heavy stillness of the night. I blinked at the harsh light of the screen, the name Director Reed glaring back at me like a warning. Calls at this hour weren't routine. They were emergencies. "Hello?" My voice was hoarse, dry from hours of sleep. "You need to come to the lab," Reed said, his tone clipped and urgent. "We found something unusual. It's in the forest near the test site." My stomach nodded. "Unusual how?" There was a pause, just long enough to tell me that Reed was deciding what to omit. "The ecosystem is behaving erratically. Just get here." The line went dead before I could press him for details. Sleep forgotten, I swung my legs out of bed, my mind already racing. As I threw on clothes, the implications hit me hard. My experiment, the one designed to stabilize fragile ecosystems, was still in its trial phase. The project wasn't supposed to interfere with the environment yet, only monitor. If something had gone wrong, it could mean my entire career. The drive to the facility was silent, save for the faint hum of the tires on the deserted road. The world outside was draped in an unsettling fog, the headlights barely cutting through the gray haze. The sight of the research complex, usually a beacon of order, felt ominous against the murky backdrop. Reed was waiting for me in the lobby, his face pale and drawn. Without a word, he led me to the observation deck overlooking the forest. The monitors displayed a scene I barely recognized. The forest, normally serene, was alive with frantic motion. Birds flitted chaotically between branches, their calls dissonant and shrill. Deer clustered in dense herds, pacing restlessly, their movements sharp and unnatural. Beneath them, the underbrush twisted and writhed as if alive, vines curling like predatory snakes. "What am I looking at?" I whispered, horrified. Reed's eyes didn't leave the screens. "This started 3 hours ago. The test site is at the center. Whatever's causing this is radiating outward." I turned to him sharply. "We haven't activated the experiment yet." "Then explain this," he snapped, gesturing to the chaos on the monitors. "Because whatever it is, it's spreading fast." My breath caught. If this was related to the experiment, it could mean something had gone catastrophically wrong. But we hadn't initiated the core process, had we? The creeping sense of unease settled deep in my chest, heavier than I cared to admit. "Show me the site," I said. Reed hesitated, then nodded grimly. The forest itself was worse than the screens had shown. The air was thick, humid despite the chill of the early morning. A sharp, metallic tang clung to every breath, and the silence between the animal cries felt alive, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. And at the center of it all, the ground beneath the test site seemed wrong. The soil was darker, pulsing faintly, as if rejecting the roots it was meant to support. A single sapling, once part of the experiment, had grown impossibly tall, its branches twisting unnaturally toward the sky. "This isn't natural," I murmured. But the question burning in my mind remained unanswered. Was this our doing, or something far older? The following days unfolded like a bad dream. Reports poured in from the surrounding area, each one stranger than the last. A colony of ants, normally meticulous and ordered, abandoned their hill entirely, swarming in concentric circles for hours until they dispersed. Birds, disoriented and silent, crashed into windows and car windshields. The forest's ecosystem, the delicate balance that supported life, was unraveling before our eyes. I sat in the facility's observation room, the constant hum of machines and monitors grating on my nerves. Data scrolled across the screen, endless lines of numbers that refused to make sense. "The patterns don't align with anything we've seen before," muttered Elena, one of our data analysts. Her usual precision was frayed, her hair unkempt, and dark circles under her eyes. She clicked through chart after chart, shaking her head. This isn't chaos. It's something new, something intentional. I didn't respond. My gaze was locked on the live feed from the forest. The sapling, now more of a grotesque tree, stood taller than ever, its bark a deep, unnatural black. The branches moved unnaturally, as though swaying to an invisible rhythm. Beneath it, the ground pulsed faintly, the effect spreading farther outward with each passing hour. Maybe we should shut it down, Elena ventured. I flinched. We didn't turn it on. Her gaze darted to me, skeptical. Then what's doing this? I didn't have an answer. My assistant, Dr. Kaylee Rowe, had avoided me for days, offering only curt responses when pressed for updates. Her demeanor was always eccentric, but now there was a desperation in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. The forest itself seemed to be turning inward. Predatory species that should have been dormant were active day and night, their behaviors erratic. Even the trees, their leaves graying as if drained of life, tilted toward the experiment site as though drawn to it. Elena interrupted my thoughts. Look at this. She pulled up a graph tracking the disturbance. At first glance, it seemed random, but as she zoomed in, a pattern emerged, a pulse, timed precisely with the frequency of our experiment's signal. My stomach dropped. How? The lights flickered, and the monitor momentarily went black. When it returned, the image on the live feed had shifted. The tree's branches stretched farther, their shadows almost reaching the camera. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a ripple in the bark, a flicker of something within. A chill settled over me. If we couldn't stop it soon, the balance wouldn't just be broken, it would be gone forever. I found Kaylee in the equipment storage room, her back turned to me as she rifled through boxes of unused monitors. Her movements were frantic, jerky, so unlike the composed researcher I had worked with for years. Kaylee, I called softly, stepping into the room. She froze, her shoulders stiffening before she turned to face me. Her eyes, usually bright with curiosity, now brimmed with an intensity I didn't recognize. She clutched a small device in her hand, its metal casing dull but unfamiliar. What's going on? I asked, my voice firmer now. I need to know the truth. She hesitated, then let out a shaky breath. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I demanded, crossing my arms. Because the forest is falling apart, Kaylee. This experiment, our experiment, is destroying everything we swore to protect. Her gaze flicked to the device in her hand, then back to me. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was just testing a hypothesis. A cold weight settled in my chest. What hypothesis? Kaylee placed the device on a nearby table, her fingers trembling. The experiment. It's not just about balancing ecosystems. It's about synchronizing them, creating a harmony that goes beyond natural equilibrium. I stared at her, the implications sinking in. Synchronization wasn't in the scope of our project. It wasn't even feasible, not without interfering in ways that could cascade out of control. Are you saying you tampered with the system? My voice wavered, the words heavier than I expected. Kaylee nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. I wanted to enhance it, to prove we could do more than just observe. But something else got involved. The room seemed to darken, the fluorescent lights dimming as her words hung in the air. Something else, I echoed. She swallowed hard. The signal we've been using, it's acting like a beacon. It's drawing something to it, something old, something we don't understand. The device on the table gave a faint hum, as though in agreement. I felt an almost imperceptible vibration in the air, as if the room itself was reacting to her confession. Turn it off, I said, stepping closer. Whatever this is, we need to shut it down. Kaylee shook her head violently. I can't. It's not just our system anymore. The signal has integrated into the environment. The forest is alive with it now, and it won't let us stop." Her words sent a chill down my spine. The experiment was no longer ours. It belonged to the forest now, or perhaps to whatever force had claimed it. I realized with growing dread that Kaylee's curiosity had torn open a door we couldn't close. The forest was no longer a place of solace. As I approached the edge of the test site, the air seemed thicker, harder to breathe. The trees, once vibrant with life, now stood as hollow sentinels, their bark mottled with strange, pulsating growths that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The sapling-turned monstrosity loomed ahead, its grotesque branches twisting toward the sky like grasping fingers. The ground beneath it was alive with motion, roots that wriggled and writhed as though searching for something. I stood at the perimeter, a knot of dread tightening in my chest. Kaylee's revelation played over and over in my mind. The experiment had become a beacon, and the forest had responded. Or worse, something within the forest had awakened. Elena's voice crackled over the walkie-talkie strapped to my belt. "Are you seeing this?" she asked, her tone edged with fear. "Yes," I replied, my voice barely audible. "And it's worse than I imagined." The monitor in my hand displayed readings that defied explanation. Energy levels were spiking far beyond anything our equipment should have been capable of producing. The pulse, a rhythmic beat that had started as a faint anomaly, was now deafening. I could feel it in my chest, a relentless thrum that seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat. "Something's emerging," Elena said. "The signal, it's stabilizing into patterns, like it's communicating." My fingers tightened around the walkie-talkie. "Communicating with what?" "I don't know," she replied, her voice trembling. "But it's not random. It's deliberate." The realization hit me like a blow. Whatever we had disturbed wasn't just reacting, it was intelligent. I stepped closer to the pulsating ground, my mind racing for solutions. If the forest had integrated the signal, then severing the connection was our only hope. But every instinct screamed that it wouldn't let me. Kaylee's warning echoed in my mind. It won't let us stop. The roots shifted as I approached, curling like serpents. They didn't move toward me, but their presence was enough to set my nerves on edge. The sapling seemed to hum, its branches quivering as if aware of my presence. The closer I got, the louder the pulse became, until it drowned out everything else. The rustling of leaves, the distant cries of birds, even my own thoughts. I reached the base of the tree, my hands trembling as I activated the override mechanism on my portable console. The interface flickered, struggling to connect with the experiment's core system. A voice crackled over the radio, cutting through the oppressive silence. "Hurry," Elena urged. "The signal is dash." Dash. Her words were lost as the pulse surged, a shockwave rippling through the air. I stumbled back, shielding my face as a gust of wind, sharp and cold, tore through the clearing. The sapling swayed, its branches contorting violently, and for a moment I thought I saw something within its hollow trunk, something moving. The override system finally engaged, a shrill beep signaling the start of the shutdown sequence. The pulse faltered, its rhythm stuttering like a heart missing beats. For a fleeting moment, I thought it was working. Then the ground erupted. Roots lashed upward, writhing like uncoiled springs, their motions too fluid, too purposeful to be natural. The pulse roared back to life, stronger than ever, and the sapling's branches twisted into grotesque shapes, their shadows dancing like living things. The console in my hand went dark. The system was rejecting me, adapting faster than I could respond. And then, from somewhere deep within the forest, a low, resonant sound echoed, a tone that was neither animal nor machine. It carried with it a weight, a presence that sent me staggering backward. The forest wasn't just alive, it was watching. And it was waiting for me to decide. Would I fight to sever the connection, risking everything? Or would I retreat, leaving the unnatural balance undisturbed but permanent? Time was slipping through my fingers, and I knew the choice would haunt me forever. The pulse resonated through my body, an insistent drumbeat that demanded surrender. The forest around me had become an alien landscape, each shadow shifting with intent, every sound a whisper of something ancient and unseen. I stood at the base of the twisted sapling, my portable console dark and useless in my hands. The ground beneath me quivered, alive with roots that sought, probed, and retreated like living veins. I felt the weight of the forest's gaze, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just watching, it was expecting, waiting. My breath caught as the realization settled over me. This wasn't a natural system in chaos. It was balance, but one redefined, reshaped by the experiment and the force it had awakened. The tree before me groaned, its trunk splitting slightly to reveal a hollow core. Within, faint lights flickered, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The pulse seemed to emanate from there, the source of the unnatural signal. The sight froze me in place. Whatever was inside wasn't just organic. It was something else, something incomprehensible. The walkie-talkie at my belt crackled. Elena's voice broke through, weak and strained. "You have to stop it, before it spreads further. If it reaches the town..." Her words faded into static, and I swallowed hard. The town, the people living on the outskirts of the forest, my colleagues, my family. All of them were unwitting participants in the spread of this alien equilibrium. I took a shaky step forward, my hand brushing against the trunk of the tree. The bark felt warm, almost alive, and my fingertips tingled as if an invisible current was flowing through me. The pulse slowed, its rhythm aligning with my heartbeat. I felt drawn closer, compelled to peer into the hollow core. The lights inside brightened, revealing twisting organic shapes that seemed to shift in response to my presence. They weren't threatening, at least not overtly. Instead, they exuded a kind of eerie calm, as though offering me a choice. My mind raced, fighting against the pull, the sense of inevitability that threatened to overtake me. A voice, not quite a sound, but a sensation, whispered in the back of my mind. Restore the balance, or leave it broken. I staggered back, my pulse racing. The forest seemed to lean in, branches creaking and shadows closing around me. I glanced down at the override device, its lifeless screen reflecting the dim light of the clearing. My fingers hovered over it, trembling with indecision. I could attempt to sever the connection completely, knowing it might destabilize the system further, or I could let it remain, an unnatural balance that could grow unchecked. The tree groaned again, the hollow brightening as the pulse quickened. I could feel its pull now, not just physical, but emotional. It offered a harmony I couldn't fully comprehend, a restoration of something ancient and broken. But at what cost? My hand moved before my mind caught up. I activated the override sequence again, a desperate act fueled by instinct rather than reason. The device whirred to life, its screen flickering weakly as it reconnected to the core system. A low hum filled the air, drowning out the pulse. The forest reacted instantly. Roots recoiled, vines slackened, and the sapling trembled, its branches twisting violently. The pulse faltered, its rhythm stuttering before fading into silence. For a moment, the clearing was eerily still, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Then, with a sound like a sigh, the tree's hollow dimmed. The light within flickered once, twice, and then went out. The oppressive weight lifted, and the air felt thinner, lighter. I collapsed to my knees, the override device slipping from my hand. The forest remained quiet, its stillness unnatural in its own right. The sapling loomed above me, its branches no longer twisting, but still radiating an unsettling presence. I didn't need to check the readings to know the experiment was over. The signal had been severed, but the forest wasn't the same. It never would be. When I returned to the facility, the others were waiting, their faces pale and drawn. Elena looked at me, her expression a mixture of relief and dread. "You stopped it," she said softly. I nodded, though the victory felt hollow. For now, the data confirmed what I already knew. The experiment had failed, but the forest's transformation was irreversible. The balance had shifted, and while the pulse was gone, traces of its presence lingered, embedded in the soil, the trees, the very air. Weeks later, I stood at the edge of the forest, the sapling visible in the distance. Its branches no longer moved, but the sense of being watched remained. The forest had stabilized, but it felt wrong, too quiet, too still. I knew better than to enter again. Whatever balance I had restored wasn't mine to understand. Yet as I turned to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Some doors once opened can never truly be closed. And somewhere deep within the forest, the faintest flicker of light pulsed once more,